White House top Republicans and the NRA have agreed on the need to regulate bump stocks. Here's what the NRA has to say. Quote, the NRA believes that devices designed to allow semi-automatic rifles to function like fully automatic rifles should be subject to additional regulations. But the organization dismissing calls for more gun control, saying banning guns from law-abiding Americans will do nothing to prevent future attacks. Robin Biro is a Democratic strategist and a former Obama campaign regional field director. And Patrice Onwuka is a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Robin, let me start with you. First off, your thoughts on what the NRA had to say.
Oh, I'm really glad that they took an action on this. And I myself, there are about 5 things that I really want them to address. Not just this issue, but in addition to this issue, because it's not just bump stocks, but trigger modification switches, because you can still modify a trigger. It takes some work to modify a trigger to make a semi-automatic weapon an automatic weapon. Also, you can buy 80% frames and build your own weapon that's unregistered. I think that's a loophole that the NRA can deal with. And we need to regulate the way some of these private sales are done. And I also don't think that body-piercing armor should be legal for civilian use. So, and I want to point out also that, we've had this law since 1986 banning automatic weapons, but there are 4 states that still allow that. So I think we still have some work to do, but I'm glad that the NRA is stepping up.
Robin, clearly this is a big issue, and there's concern that Democrats particularly are trying to make this a much bigger issue than it needs to be, and that they're walking a slippery slope. Patrice, listen to what Wayne LaPierre had to say on Hannity last night, and I'll get your response on the other side.
The American public values this freedom to protect themselves. And now you have Dianne Feinstein and Schumer and the media to get this horrible tragedy. And they want to piggyback their whole agenda to ban guns, restrict law-abiding people for the last 20 years, this circus on the back of this tragedy and enact it.
What do you think, Patrice?
I think he makes a very interesting point. Most Americans do support the right to be able to protect yourself. And we're not just talking about an intruder in your home. We're talking about in the cases of domestic violence. And that's an important issue for women. I just want to go back, though, to this idea about gun, these modifications on guns to make them semi-automatic. In 2010, the Obama administration actually allowed the sales of these guns because they didn't think that they would be a way to, they didn't kind of fall within certain ramifications for becoming semi-automatic. So it's actually good that maybe Republicans can now clean up the mess that the Obama administration failed to do. It is important that Americans can feel safe. And part of that for a lot of people, particularly Black Americans, is ensuring that you can protect yourself with your own firearm.
Robin, there's an op-ed in the New York Times. It's by Bret Stephens. He's calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's ridiculous. Let me tell you, I am a former Army Ranger. I'm a veteran of Army Ranger, so there's no way that I abhor the argument about the liberal gun grab anytime we have a crisis like this. I am a concealed carry holder myself. I routinely get death threats. Like, this is a serious issue, and it's never going to work.
All right,
So,
and you brought in the death threats. Oh, gosh, Robin. Patrice, what do you think? What do you think of that op-ed in the Times by Bret Stephens repealing the Second Amendment?
I mean, I think he's actually giving voice to what a lot of Democrats really want, which is to see the full repeal of the Second Amendment. So, he actually has the gall to come out and say it. But is it going to get passed? Absolutely not. And I think for very good reasons. Just as my colleague on the panel mentioned, I live in Washington, D.C., and I know that, being here, I haven't been able to have a gun, but I know what it's like to be followed by cars in the streets and to expect a police officer to respond to my 911 call in that moment. I want to know that I can protect myself, and I think there are a lot of people who feel the same way.
Yeah, and just to point out, Bret Stephens is a conservative columnist. This is going to play out in the election. Particularly, there's a gubernatorial race in Virginia, but most of that state favors the Second Amendment. So how do you see this playing out in politics, particularly the upcoming elections, Robin?
big. I swear, if anybody, I worked with across the aisle here for this 5-point plan of mine. I spoke to gun brokers and some of my as a veteran ranger, I spoke to some of my biggest gun enthusiast friends, and they support this issue about the bump stocks, the trigger modification switches, the 80% frames. We call those ghost guns because you can buy those. They don't have a serial number. They're used. Gangs use them to commission. You can buy the frames, then buy all the parts, and effectively have a gun that you don't need any background check for, and it has no serial number. So there are loopholes that they support, and we're good.
There's always a loophole, and as we wrap this up, Patrice, I'll give you the last word here. I mean, I was even reading that you can make a semi-automatic weapon, a fully automatic one, by using a belt buckle. So if there is a will, isn't there a way to do what you want to do?
Well, and that's part of the challenge of trying to legislate what's in someone's heart. You can't legislate away evil. And unfortunately, in cases like this, with this tragedy, we're dealing with an evil person. We may never understand his full motivations, but a law can't change that.
Yeah. You can't legislate away evil. Well said. Robin, Patrice, thank you so much for your time this morning. Have a great weekend.